To start, welcome everyone. So this is lecture number 6, which means we've got one more lecture and then we're finishing this quite an impactful lot of information that has been given to us by me. So hopefully you can process it, you can watch it again in your own time. I'm not going to take it off YouTube there, and you can read the notes as well. So lecture 6, let me just get rid of this thing. Okay. Uh, I'll just be with you guys in just a sec. Okay, I think I've got it. Right. So the more we understand the Roman Empire, the better we're going to understand our New Testament, and particularly the writings of Paul. I think it's important for us to know that because Paul didn't just write out of no context. Paul often in his letters he mentions that he's a Jew, that he's a Roman citizen, that he was born in Tarsus. And so it's important for us to know a little bit about Paul because, by us knowing that, oops, what's happening here now? I don't want this. Sorry, I'm just getting all of you videos. Sorry, guys, I'm just having some technical issues here. Um, Not sure how am I going to check this out because I'm actually seeing, I can't see the lecture notes. I'm seeing all of you guys. I don't want that. No, I don't want that. Ah, there we go. Okay. Hopefully it will stay like that. So again, sorry for that. So the more we understand the Roman Empire, the better we are going to understand our New Testament, and particularly the writing of Paul. And I'm hoping to walk you through what was going on with the most common things of everyday life. And that is particularly today, we're going to be looking at the whole thing of food. So we're going to walk through the market that were known as the Macellum, as well as the restaurant, as we dig into how Paul is drawing from this everyday imagery to speak into the Christian walk. And you remember in one of our lectures, not this series, but a previous series, we spoke about, I think it was the series with Revelation. I'm not sure if that was a series that many of you have done it with me or not, but if you have, we spoke about. Sorry, I'm just really trying to get rid of this. There we go. Right. We spoke about the temple, and we spoke about how, especially in Revelation, when we spoke about the mark of the beast, we spoke about that in order to buy or sell things at the market, you had to go and offer something at the temple, and then you will get a mark. And that will mean that you can go and buy or sell food. Um, and that was the mark of the beast. Now, Paul is writing with this understanding, and you can see now when we started talking about the market and the restaurants that the temple again comes in it. So you can make a link, and we will make a link to Revelation later on. One of the things I learned by looking at the Macellum was that it occurred to me Romans had to work really hard to keep in staple goods because things had to be without refrigeration. Replenish constantly the food because as soon as it went bad, you had to change the food. That means that the supply lines across the empire were absolutely essential for people to eat food that was still edible. So the Macellum, in fact, a building, and we find them all over the place. It's a large rectangular building. It often has a center round building, and you can see a blueprint of an excavation that was found in Pompeii, and you can see at the bottom a round building in the center, and around the outside there are some of those stalls facing inward to sell you fish and vegetables and fruit and all of those things, and some facing to the outside that are often restaurants attached, like a food court attached to the Macellum itself. Okay, so that's probably what it looked like. Now, the round building that's in the center is actually what's called the Thalos. Some were buried that way, and we know for sure is this. The two of them, when excavated, had a lot of fish scales. So we're going to call the round building the fish market, okay, in the middle. And what we know is that next to it, with the big pillars, so you can see in the picture above there with the three big pillars, you will find a temple. So in that picture below where you can see the round ones, to the round building, to the left, you will see the temple. In its picture on the top, you're looking at the entrance to the temple. So the meat market in town is religious. Now, if you think about it, there is a reason. In Pompeii, we find many bakeries all over town, but all of the meat is butchered in one area, in a meat packers district, if you will. And the reason for that is hygiene, but also religiosity. So there is a cultic background to this. So there's a religious association, and as I said, if you studied that the study that I did on Revelation, then we've touched quite a bit about the marketplace and the temple itself as well. And what I want you to see about that is that for Romans, then this whole presentation is not just a shopping experience, it's also shockingly a cultic experience. So whether you had to buy the food, whether you had to sacrifice the food to the temple, whether you had to go to the temple first to do the sacrifices before you were able to buy and sell. So when you buy meat, the stamp would have had a god on it, if you will. And it will be something sponsored by the empire, but woven into some very, very important religious cultic observance. Now, that causes us a problem, especially if you're a meat eater. This becomes the greatest test of Christian defense and maturity. Let me say it in another way. In 1 Corinthians, the big test over how to deal with the gray areas where one believer says you can and the other believer says you can't over the issue of meat offered to idols. And in fact, if you lived in a city, it means only meat probably in town would have been there. If you're in a rural area, it's probably that you could get meat elsewhere and not necessarily in the Macellum, in the food market, or you could buy it in another way. So I want you to think for a moment about 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. It says this, now concerning food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge makes one concise, but low edifies. What he's not saying is you don't have to know stuff. There is about 1,189 chapters in the Bible. And here's the point. God's big on details. He's not saying, look, as long as you love and all gets along, we are okay. But he's saying, if you lose track of the object of my affection, God's love, my eternal love for people, in your search, your Bible can become a sordid cut. So he says, therefore, concerning the meat which is offered to idols, we know that idols is nothing in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, indeed there are many gods and many lords. Yet for us there is only one God, the Father, from whom all things we exist, from him, one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through him. However, not all people have this knowledge, but some, being accustomed of the idol until now, eat food as if it were sacrificed to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Now, here's the problem in this whole debate. Paul recognizes that there are some people who are just coming out of a cultic side of this equation, that if they see you eating in certain situation, it will draw them back into that cultic practice. Conscious, isn't it? In other words, I'm often offended. I've offended you because I don't like what you're doing. Or conscious here is you will push me back into my pagan lifestyle, and I will actually be unable to continue in my walk with God. So the meat here, obviously, this is all comes out of a discussion that came out of Acts 15 in the Jerusalem Council. And a whole idea of whether or not you could eat meat offered to idols. Now, a little bit about Acts 15. What happened in the Jerusalem Council, up to this point, a huge percentage of the church, the early church, was made out of Jewish converts. The problem came is that now not only Jewish converts were following Christ, there were Gentile converts who were following Christ, who were entering the early church, who were entering early Christianity. And the Council of Jerusalem, in Acts 15, you can read a lot about it, was one of the things was, can we allow non-Jews to participate and believe in this Messiah Jesus and follow the ways of the Messiah Jesus? And of course they said yes, because Jesus is for all, and Jesus said, go into all the world. Yes, begin in Jerusalem, but go to the corners of the earth. So yes, they can. But the problem is, once you are now opening your faith to other people from other faith, they're going to bring a little bit of their culture. They're going to bring a little bit of their practices into this newfound faith. And so the problem arose with these guys who would eat meat which was offered to idols, would probably themselves were idol worshippers. Now they are saying, well, what do we do now? Okay, and if you are a believer in Christ and you are saying it's okay to eat that meat, then are you pushing them into the practice? If you say they're not, are you offending them? Okay, so I hope you can understand the argument that is going around here. Now, in First Corinthians chapter 8, 9, and 10, if you look closely, Paul actually breaks up the issue into three different settings. He says this: here are the rulers, and I'm paraphrasing here. Here are the rulers for what you can do, the rules of what you can do, or principles for what you can do with this gray area thing for which we don't all agree. In private, in your home, where no one can see you. And then he moves to a second one. He says, this is what you do when you're out at a public in one of those outlets next to the Machalum. So those could be the restaurant, the local restaurants, because someone just coming out of a Celtic background might see you there and think, you're okay. You're my Sunday school teacher, by the way, but you're okay with eating this, and I'm going to slide back into my pagan lifestyle. And then he goes to the third section, and he says that I really like it. Is very creative in Paul. Paul goes to when a not yet Jesus followers invite you to their picnic, and he's serving meat offered to idols. Paul settles the issue and deals with it in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 right through to 10. Now, the whole correspondence between the sacrifice and the meat is really important. In general, let's just talk for a minute about a normal Roman meal and eating schedule. In general, it would have looked like this. You have your breakfast, which was known as intercalum, was usually a light meal at best. Sometimes you had salted bread, milk, wine. Much of the Holy Land, for those of you who've ever been to the Holy Land, all the rage was in those days was barley bread with warm wine and honey poured over it, sort of like a kind of a breakfast cereal of sort. But you might also have a cheese, a piece of cheese, and some eggs. Often people overlook the breakfast, the intercalum, and people still do in favor of a cup of coffee today. I mean, what does mom always say? Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Well, it was a problem then, and it's still a problem now. Some people don't actually have breakfast. But the middle of the day, you would have lunch. And the cheapest Meridianus or prandium is what was most of the time called, was popular among the field service workers. These are guys who got up, grabbed a quick bite, went out and worked in the field. Now, it's hot and the stomachs are growling, so they come in and they eat some fruit and eggs and cheese, and sometimes they have meat or dried fish. Now, there's also what was known the cena. The cena is your main meal of the midday. It's usually in the afternoon, and it's wonderful because it serves with a well-watered wine mix followed by a nap. Okay, so you get a nice meal and then you get a nap, and you know from that we get a number of European customs that had the siesta. At any rate, sometimes there's an evening snack called the Vesperna. Although as the empire gets later on and develops, the cena gets bigger and the Vesperna gets lost. And so we find that it's pushed out over a couple of centuries. Now, why am I telling you all of this? And you'll see how it all connects. Now, another important thing to actually factor in was when you are talking about the economic indicator in the Bible, one of the key things that archaeologists and anthropologists look for is bread. Okay? Is bread. We've got another 9 minutes to this session. So if we get kicked out, then give it 10 minutes and then log into the second session. Okay. But let's see if we can finish it before that. So Bread was what they were looking for. Bread is a symbol of all your daily needs. Jesus said, "Give us this day our daily bread." And what he meant by it was give us our daily needs, right? So the important thing is a daily nutritional requirement, according to the Roman Department of Agriculture, was a quart of grain. Now, a quart of grain will basically be one loaf of bread, which is the requirement, and it's a requirement that was actually specified originally for slaves. You had to add olive oil and a little bit of salt, and you can serve a type of wine with it. So that was what was the daily requirement. What's essential to understand is this. This is what the Senate watched as the economic indicator. In other words, what's the price of bread? So watch for it in the New Testament because it shows up. How much does bread cost? Well, I take you to Mark chapter 6 for a moment. Jesus is out feeding a mass number of 5,000 people. And what's interesting to me is in Mark chapter 6, he answered them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and spend 200 denarii on bread and give it to them to eat? Now, normal people would walk right past this and won't even notice it. It just, okay, interesting information. But archaeologists, when they look at this, especially biblical archaeologists that are interested in what is said in the Bible and what is being excavated, will say, wait a minute, let's do a little bit of a math here. 5,000 people, at least males that we know of. How many were there? Divided by 200 denarii equals the laborer's daily wage could buy about 25 loaves of bread. Okay? So, now it takes a little bit of maths to get there, but my point is, and archaeologists' point is, that when you look back, this is a laborer's wage could buy you 24 or 25 loaves of bread in a time of the New Testament. Why is it important? Because by Revelation chapter 6, and here's that link to Revelation again, the cost of bread is subject in the 7 seals telling you something. Now listen to this. It comes from Revelation chapter 6, verse 5. When he broke the 3rd seal, because remember there were different seals, I heard the 3rd living creature say, come. I looked and behold a black horse. Remember there were 4 different horses, okay? And he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. Now, if you remember, if you did do that Revelation study, we said that a black horse normally was that there was a conquering army coming or a conquering government coming, which meant not long after that there was going to be tremendous amount of taxes, and the economy was going to go through a really, really bad time because of this conquering army. That was what a black horse meant to them. And Revelation carries on. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius. Now, again, if you are a biblical archaeologist or a student of the Bible, you say, wow, wait a minute. 3 quarts of barley for denarius. And then it carries on. It says, do not damage the oil and the wine. And that's an add-on. And it's probably the oil and the wine is probably a reference to pharmaceutical use. So what's shocking here about this prophetic portion is that if you look at it, it looks like not all the commodities were affected equally. So that tells you there is an iniquity that involves human involvement, not just a natural famine. Because often we thought it has to do with a natural famine. But it's not only that, okay? Because if you are going to lose barley, you're going to lose wheat. If you're going to lose wheat, you're going to lose barley. But these are not equitable stuff. And the Greek word here for quart is a koinex. It actually, the standard measures to make 1.5 Roman loaves. Okay, I probably completely confused you, but I want you to hang on with me. I want you to follow me for a second. And I know I'm going into a maths problem, and you're probably thinking to yourself, oh no, so there's a train traveling from here to there at that speed, and another train firing from. No, please, don't break my head with all of this maths problem. But the point of this whole thing is this: is a 1,500% increase over Mark chapter 6. So what he's telling you, in these seals, in the world gets plummeted by inflation and its inequitable human cause, and not across all commodities, but across one you need. Now, it's important then to just look at the details for that economic indicator. What's the economic indicator? The bread. But that's not the only thing. Here's the thing. We spoke about it before, about the Thermopolia. We talked about the Pompina and the Tavern. We spoke about the bath. We spoke about the pubs. We spoke about the brothels. We talked about them. And in that setting, I just want you to remember what the whole thing was about is this. Most people couldn't cook at home. Okay? So here's the point. Point is that people didn't have a way of cooking. The majority of people ate in pubs because that's what they could do if you didn't have any way to cook. Only the rich people had what we know today as kitchen. Now, so what did they do? Where did they go and eat? They went to eat in those places. Well, we can look at people like Horace, who writes, "Tonight I ate a meal of onions, porridge, and pancakes." I don't know, maybe he was weird or unusual, but this is some of the few pieces of information that we have from excavation in Pompeii. We know that Pompina offers a variety of small things. We also know that the Thermopolia, okay, actually gave you a place where you could get hot wine and hot drinks and also some hot soups. And remember, we looked at all of that in previous lectures. The way, if you are a Roman, you don't want Roman wine, okay? You want Greek wine, because Greek wines were to the Romans what French wine is to us. Now, Pliny the Elder, that's also comes to us through excavation, writes a 37-volume Roman encyclopedia called the Naturalis Historia, and it's dedicated to the Emperor Titus. And he writes it. He publishes after his death. He dies actually in Mount Vesuvius explosion. But book 14 of his 37 volumes is exclusive about making wine. Okay, we've got less than a minute, so I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask you in 10 minutes time, okay, because it's not going to allow you until 10 minutes time. In 10 minutes time, we're going to carry on with our lecture session 2, and it won't be long. It will take us about another 10 minutes before we finish. So I will see you in session 2.
See you session 2, Lachai.
Press record, and then hide this bar. There we go. Okay, so as I said, there's a lot of information, and some people might say, "Oh, do we really need to know all that information?" But again, I'm trying to show you that Paul would have known all of this. He would have known. Paul was an educated man, and he would have known a lot of the stuff that I'm telling you. Obviously, not from an archaeological point of view, because you would have lived actually in that era. But he would have been able to tell you a lot of what what the stuff that we're digging into. He would have been exposed to the bread. He would have been exposed to the wine. He would have understood how much bread cost and all that kind of stuff. So again, you can see how in this lecture we're touching on a lot of things. We're looking at the lens of historical. We're now looking at the lens of some outside information. So not information from the Bible, but Pliny was a historian. He was also an elder in the early church. And this is exactly who I'm talking about. So Pliny the Elder writes a 37-volume Roman encyclopedia. They're called the Naturalis Historia, and it's dedicated to the Emperor Titus. Sorry, I'm just letting more people in. And he writes in it, it's published after his death. He dies at the explosion of Mount Vesuvius, and his book 14 is exclusively about making wine. And book 17 was a discussion of various verticultural techniques, various ways in which you make wine. So he talks about how the soil is at the corner of the whole thing, okay? It's not so much about the grapes, but it's about the soil in which the grapes are planted and grow, that it brings you the right kind of grape for the right kind of wine. Pliny helps us with a couple of insights. One of the things that he says is that a bottle of wine was about the amount that every Roman citizen had on a daily basis, which, remember, we said that the daily requirement was a loaf of bread. He's saying, yeah, probably that was right, but also wine. Now, there were no juices or anything like that. It was probably water and different varieties of fermented grapes. So you probably would have had your grape juice, which wasn't really fermented, and then various stages of fermentation. So one bottle every day, except if you lived in Pompeii, where they knew how to put it away. So if you lived in Pompeii, you had more wine than just a bottle a day. The term wine, particularly in the Bible, is a kind of an unspecific category. It's not a specific thing. Wine is a general information, and I'll show you just now. So when you say wine in the Bible, you're actually saying a whole lot of range of things. Now, about 30 years ago, the coolest thing happened with regards to all of this information, and that's why there's a lot of information that you can get about wine. If you're interested to know about wine in the Bible, you can get a lot of information. But the Italians were building a large government housing project. This is about 30 or so years ago. And when they dug down to dig the foundation, they found a farm that was covered over by the explosion of the mountain. Okay. And they were covered by all of the ashes and all of the lava and everything like that. And it was called Boscarella. And Boscarella gave us, or anyone in modern day looking back then, a full rural view of what's called a villa rustica. Now, a rustica villa was a full operating wine farm, and that has been 100% restored because of the lava and ashes that covered it. So it's just on a side thing, and that's where we get a lot of the information. At any rate, when you look into the Koine, New Testament that is, the word oinos is actually the word that Jerome just translates in the Vulgate as venom. Now, who's Jerome? Some of you might also not have attended some of my lectures about the canon and all that kind of stuff. So a quick side and a quick lesson about the Bible translation, and then we'll come back to what we're dealing with. Jerome was the first one who translated the New Testament, okay, which was written originally in Greek, He was the first one to translate it into German. Okay? So the early church, the Roman Catholic Church, not the early church, but the Roman Catholic Church, the Bible, the Old Testament and New Testament, Old Testament was written original language in Hebrew and Aramaic. New Testament was written in Greek. It was translated into Latin. Okay? The Roman Catholic Church, basically, if you were able to read Latin, you were able to read the Old and New Testament. Okay? Jerome, and this is a part of the whole Reformation that not long ago we celebrated the Reformation, where the Presbyterian Church, Methodist Church, Anglican Church, any Baptist Church, any of those churches are as a result of the Reformation, where the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church is split into two. Jerome translated it into the Vulgate. The Vulgate is the first non-Latin word, okay? And he translates the word wine, onios, into venom, okay? Literally like venom of a snake. The gospel do make note that there are different qualities, different types of venom, different types of wines, if you will. So when you are looking through the gospel, I want you to see that we recover all kinds of different kinds of wine. For example, John chapter 2, remember in the water into a wine incident, it says, and he said to him, every man serves a good wine first. This is at a wedding. And when the people have drunk freely, then he serves a poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. Again, the use of venom, okay, onios in the Greek, venom in the new translation, okay. Later on in the gospel, you're going to find another story. The people stood by, they were looking on, the rulers were sneering at him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself, if this is the Messiah, the Christ of God, the chosen one. And the soldier mocked him and came up to him and offered him sour wine. We often translate it into vinegar, okay? But it was also the word venom, which is the sour wine. So the New Testament collects all the different kinds of wine as onios and then translated as to venom. So if you were there at the time of the Apostle Paul, right? And this is, I'm bringing this all together, and you wanted to talk about doubtful things like meat offering to idols is your best test case. Why? Because you're going to ask the question of those who are listening to you, those who are reading, can a believer do it? Can they do it in private? Can they do it in public? Is it hypocritical if I do something in private but not in public? And the second thing that I believe that Paul is trying to tell us is, I want you to know is that bread and wine are indicators that were used throughout the Bible to tell how the empire was doing. Whether it was a lot of bread and whether it was a lot of wine, what was the price, okay? And that would be a good indication of what the empire was doing and how they were doing. So, guys, I hope with all of this, you got something in there worth pondering and listening and thinking. You're welcome to listen to it again when I send you the recording. And of course, I will send you also the notes within a day or two. What are we going to do in our last lecture, lecture 7? During the height of the Roman Empire, the world experienced an unprecedented era of stability that allowed people to travel freely. Okay, the Romans were known as people that made roads, and that's where you get the all roads lead to Rome, because that's basically what they were really known with. The footprint that they left behind in history, among many things, was that of roads. Most did so by land. Few logged more miles than the Apostle Paul. And during his missionary journey, the Apostle Paul traveled thousands of miles by land and see. Along the way, he experienced fear, repeatedly beating, robberies, imprisonment, shipwreck, but he never allowed fear to become a barrier to his faith. And I hope that when we finish our series and we're going to look at this lecture, I hope will inspire you to face your fears with greater courage and to live with dangerous faithfulness. So guys, there we go. There's lecture 6 done and dusted. Any comments before we say goodnight?
Very interesting. Thank you, Lachai.
You are welcome.
Yes,
Thanks, Lachai.
You are welcome. All right. So I will see you next week.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Sunday.
Yeah. And
Sleep
some of you, I'll
well.
see you on Sunday. Yeah.